Alright, thank you for continuing with the procurement subject. What we're going to go through tonight is dealing with contracts and procurement. The objectives of going through contract and procurement is to make sure that you're comfortable with purchasing and the contract management and the project inputs and outputs from the anything to do with coming into your project or going out from your project. Now, what a lot of people talk when they talk about procurement, they actually talk about procuring, which is just purchasing. But when we're talking about contract management and procurement, we're actually talking about the things that can go out from your project as well. So you might, for example, be working in a mining organisation and their major project may be to go and do some investigation and analysis out on different fields, and then part of their project might be procuring the clients to come in and get the clients on board and contracts in place before they start doing any mining activities. So contract and procurement actually covers that sort of thing as well. So it's anything to do with a contract that's either going to have inputs to your project or outputs from your project. Alright, now we're referring to PMBOK, which is Chapter 12.313. Now, in the diploma, we've also had the question raised as to why we don't use Prince. Has everyone heard of Prince? Prince 2? Prince is another methodology. PMBOK, which is a project management body of knowledge, is one, and Prince is another. And it's just a different methodology. If you use Prince and you want to use that as your strategies for how you're coming up with your assessment and assignment material, then that's fine. But as long as you're actually coming up with the marking material, that's what we need to cover. Procurement is not one thing, it's a myriad of things, and that's including, you know, everything that you're providing to a project, and also what you, as I was saying, the outputs from the project. So it might be tenders come into this a lot, contracts come in, and things we'll talk about also cover some of the very basics of contract law. And obviously a lot of this is around the suppliers. When you're in a real project, quite often you've got to determine whether you can manage something within your project in-house. You might be able to make it or use resources that you already have, but you'll identify things that you cannot do internally within the team and the project and the materials that you have. So that's when we get into the procurement activity. So as I was saying, you have inputs to your project, you have project activities, and then you have outputs from your project, and either end of the project or both can be happening throughout the life cycle of the project, and those things are actually controlled as part of your procurement process. When we're talking about incoming, you'll need to identify at the beginning, in the concept stage of your project. This is where you're going through the identification, the analysis of what you need to buy into your project. So we need to first of all identify what you need to buy in. So for example, if you've got a construction project, you'll be looking at the materials and the contractors and the services that you need to have, and who's going to inspect and who's going to sign off and all that sort of thing. So some of those things are just like a rate that you pay, but some things you'd actually have under contract, and that's when we look at it in the procurement avenue. So we need to identify the clear requirements. So quite often, remember when we were doing the HR subject, you did a position description and you had KRAs, key result areas, KPIs, key performance indicators. Well, you do the similar sort of thing for this. Sometimes it's called a statement of work, sometimes, you know, you have a whole bunch of different names, but what you actually need is you need to clearly identify all the requirements around the thing it is that you're going to procure into the project. Then you go through an evaluation exercise and you say, okay, who it is that we're going to actually work through with as the supplier, go through a contract management exercise and the process of how you manage the contracts throughout the life cycle. And you'll know what DIFOT means, delivery and full on time. Normally when we're looking at your contract management, you have to have some method of managing your DIFOT to make sure that that's worthy to pay them when they're actually demanding to be paid. And of course then we have payments. So the opposite to that is obviously outgoing. So it's identifying who you're going to sell and supply from your project. You go through the clear specifications of what you have and make sure that you're meeting what that client's requirements are. You're going through an exercise to identify who the purchasers will be, and again the contract management and your outgoing process and DIFOT. So you've actually got to make sure that you being the supplier as part of your project, you're actually delivering in full on time to your clients, so that you don't have back charges and disputes over invoices, etc., etc. And of course you're invoicing and receipting. So we have 4 stages in the project. So obviously we have concept, design, implementation and finalisation, which you've all been through before. So in the concept stage is where you would try and identify all your procurement requirements straight up. Okay, so you say, okay, these are the suppliers we need, these are the materials we need externally, and to a large degree you've already covered a lot of those things in your work breakdown structure, but we didn't identify them as a specific procurement exercise. In the design phase, you'd actually plan what you're going to do, when you're going to get things, how you're going to get them, where they're going to be delivered to, where you're going to store them, when they're going to be used by, when you need the second delivery, whatever it might be. Then during the implementation, you are undertaking an administration procedure, so you're actually checking that what comes in is what you ordered, that you've got DIFOT, and that you are prepared to make payment when you're actually asked to. And then when you're going through a finalisation stage, you're closing your procurement, so you're finishing all your contracts, you're making sure that you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's, you've got the contracts, the signed documents. One of the big things I'm really hot on, I've raised with you before, is making sure that any signed documents are maintained for the long term, so that you can actually find them when you need them if there's any future contract disputes or legal situations. Those are actually discussed in PMBOK on page 317. Now, does anyone have any experience with contract law? No? A little bit? I know enough to be dangerous, but there's actually 5 elements that you need to remember when you're negotiating a contract. And unless you've actually had experience with this, you wouldn't be doing it. You would actually make sure that what you needed and wanted was covered, but you'd actually be getting somebody who had the legal nous and the experience in contract law to negotiate on your behalf. So there's 5 rules when it comes to contract law. Now, the interpretation of these rules and an interpretation of circumstances around a negotiation are so broad that is why there are so many solicitors out there that are engaged in nothing but contract law. But the 5 principles are that there is an offer and acceptance, so that there's 2 parties, one's making an offer and one actually accepts it. The second is that it's certain in all material aspects. Now, I've actually got a link on the website that actually goes through, describes these in more detail. But certain in all material aspects means that it's not ambiguous, that it's very clear in the contract what they're going to get and what they're not going to get, and what consideration is that's involved. So what I'm saying is, in the contract you must be very clear in what your material aspects are that are going to be involved in the contract. The third is consideration. A contract that has no consideration, which is an exchange of something in payment, it's not subject to contract law. So again, the consideration is really open to interpretation. So if you are given a piece of paper in consideration for your house, then somebody could argue the fact that that was consideration because you agreed to it. But normally it's monetary based, or an exchange or a barter of something. The fifth is that there's actually intent, so no one can trick you into it. So they're trying to cover you that you don't accidentally sign a form saying you're going to do something and you didn't actually know you were doing. So there must be a clear intention, and that you have the capacity to make that agreement, so that you're not sitting in the loony bin, somebody tries to come take advantage of you. So those are the 5 rules of contract, and they're a good 5 rules to know yourself personally when you are dealing with day-to-day matters. I had a colleague ring me up yesterday who was having issues with an internet service provider. So they tried to charge her thousands and thousands, and she said, she rang me up and sort of said, what do I do? I've already told them to send all my information over to another hosting service over in Perth, and they had done that, but then they sent her an overdue account threatening notice to call in a collection agency for $150 for actually sending the stuff over to Perth. And they'd never told her that there would be a cost, and they'd never sent her an invoice. And so in my Bushman's lawyer's hat, I sort of said, well, I think you've actually got the right to challenge that, because they never told you beforehand what it would cost. They didn't tell you that there would be any cost. They haven't invoiced you, so therefore they have no right to make a late payment to notice. In fact, it would be questionable whether they had any right to make demands for payment at all, because they'd already done it and they hadn't told before they did it that there would actually be a cost. So consider those 5 things when you're dealing in any way of contract.